grass and small shrubby plants. Then, when he remembered the expedition, he was convinced that he had been dreaming. What brought him to a saner view was the discovery that he was enveloped in furs, which were insufferably hot. He had braced himself and succeeded in unfastening his fur coat, and thus discovered that apparently none of his bones were broken. But the plane must have fallen from a considerable height to have been smashed so badly. Then Tommy discovered that he was lying upon an extensive mound of sand, thrown up as by some gigantic bull, for burrow tracks ran through it in every direction. It was this that had saved his life. Something was moving at his side. It was half submerged in the sand pit, and it was moving parallel to him with great rapidity. A grayish body, half covered with grains of sand, emerged, waving two enormously long tentacles. It was a shrimp, but fully 3 feet in length, and Tommy had never before had any idea what an unpleasant object a shrimp is. Tommy staggered to his feet and dropped nearer the plane, eyeing the shrimp with horror. But he was soon relieved as he discovered that it was apparently harmless. It slithered away and once more buried itself in the pile of sand. Now Tommy was beginning to remember. He looked into the wreckage of the plane. Jim Dodd was not there. He called his name repeatedly, and there was no response, except a dull echo from the mountains behind the veil of fog. He went to the other side of the plane. He scanned the ground all about him. Jimmy had disappeared. It was evident that he was nowhere near, for Tommy could see the whole of the lower scope of the bowl on every side of him. He had walked away, or had he been carried away? Tommy thought of the shrimp and shuddered. What other fearsome monsters might inhabit this extraordinarily valley? He sat down, leaning against the wreck of the fuselage, and tried to adjust his mind, tried to keep himself from going mad. He knew now that the flight had been no dream, that he was a member of his uncle's expedition, that he had flown with Jim toward the pole, had crashed in a vacuum. But where was Jim, and how were they going to get out of this damp place? Something like a heap of stones not far away attracted Tommy's attention. Perhaps Jim Dodd was lying behind that. Once more Tommy got up on his feet and began walking toward it. On the way, he stumbled against the sharp edge of something that protruded from the ground. It cut his leg sharply, and, with a curse, he began rubbing his shin and looking at the thing. Then he saw that it was another of the fossil shells, half buried in the marshy ooze on which he was treading. The ground in this lower part of the valley was a swamp, on account of the very fine mist falling from the fog clouds that surrounded it impenetrably on every side. Then Tommy came upon another shell, and then another, and now he saw that there were piles of what he had taken to be rock everywhere, and that this was not rock, but great heaps of the shells, all equally intact. Hundreds of thousands of the prehistoric beetles must have died in the valley, perhaps overcome by some cataclysm. Tommy examined the heap near which he stood. He yelled Dodd's name, but again no answer came. Instead, something began to stir among the heaps of shells. For a moment, Tommy hoped against hope that it was Dodd, but it wasn't Dodd. It was a living beetle. A beetle fully 5 feet high as it stood erect, a pair of enormous wings outspread, and the head, which was larger than a man's, was the most frightful object Tommy had ever seen. Jim Dodd would have said at once that this was one of the Cluinidae, or snout beetles, for a prolongation of the head between the eyes formed a sort of beak a foot in length. The mouth, which opened downward, was armed with a terrific mandible enormous crystals of cut glass. Immediately in front of the eyes were two mandibles as long as a man's arms, with feathery processes at the ends. In addition to these, there were three pairs of legs, the front pair as long as a man's, the hind pair almost as long as a horse's. Paralyzed with horror, Tommy watched the monster, which had apparently been disturbed by the vibrations of his voice, extract itself from among the shells. Then, with a bound that covered 15 feet, at less than the distance between them by half. And then a still more amazing thing happened, for of a sudden the hard shell slipped from the thorax, the wing cases dropped off, the whole of the bony part slipped to the ground with a clang, and a soft, defenseless thing went slithering away among the rocks. The beetle had molted. Tommy dropped to the ground in the throes of violent nausea. Then, looking up again, he saw the girl. She was about 100 yards away from him, very close to the fallen plane, and she must have emerged from a large hole in the ground, which Tommy could now see under a ledge of overhanging rock. She seemed to be dressed in a single garment which fell to her knees and appeared to fit tightly about her body, but as she came nearer, Tommy, watching her, petrified by this latest apparition, discovered that it was woven of her own hair, which must have been of immense length, for it fell naturally to her shoulders, and thence was woven into this close-fitting material, a fringe an inch or two in length extended beneath the selvage. She was about 6 feet tall, and apparently made after the normal human pattern. She moved with a slow, majestic swing, and if ever any female had seemed to Tommy to have the appearance of an angel, this unknown woman did. She was so fair in that flossy flaxen covering. She moved with such easy grace that Tommy, gaping, gradually crept near her. She did not seem to see him. She was stooping over the very sand heap into which he had fallen. Suddenly, with lightning-like rapidity, her arms shot out, her hands began tunneling in the sand. With a cry of triumph, she pulled out the shrimp Tommy had seen, or another like it, and stripping it off the shell, began devouring it with evident relish. In the midst of her meal, the girl raised her head and looked at Tommy. He saw that her eyes were filmed, vacant, dead. Then of a sudden, a third membrane was drawn back across the pupils, and she saw him. She let the shrimp drop to the ground, uttered a cry, and moved toward him with a tottering gait. She groped toward him with outstretched arms, and then she was blind again, for the membrane once more covered her pupils. It was as if her eyes were unable to endure even the dim light of the valley, through whose surrounding mist the low sun, setting just above the horizon, was unable to diffuse itself save as a brightening of the fog curtain. Tommy stepped toward the girl. His outstretched hand touched hers. It was unquestionably a woman's hand he held, delicately warm and exquisitely molded fingers, in whose touch there seemed to be, for the girl, some tactile impression of him. Again, that membrane was drawn back from the girl's pupils for a fleeting flash. Tommy saw two eyes of intense black, their color contrasting curiously with the flaxen color of her hair and her white skin, almost the tint of an albino's. Those eyes had surveyed him and appeared satisfied that he was one of her kind. She could not have seen very much in that almost instantaneous flash of vision. Queer that membrane, as if she had been used to living in the dark, as if the full light of the day was unbearable. She drew her hand away. Soft vocals came from her lips. Suddenly, she turned swiftly. She could not have seen, but before Tommy had seen, balls covering the ground in 15-foot leaps as they dashed at the two. To his horror, Tommy saw Jimmy Dodd among them, wrapped in his fur coat like a mummy and being pushed and rolled forward like a football. For a moment, Tommy hesitated, torn between his solicitude for Jim Dodd and that for the girl. Then, as the foremost of the monsters bounded to her side, he ran between them. The vicious jaws snapped within 6 inches of Tommy's face, and with a force that would have carried away an ear or shredded the cheek if they had met. Tommy struck out with all his might, and his fist clanged on the resounding shell, so that the blood spurted from his bruised knuckles. He had struck the monster squarely upon the thorax, and he had not discommoded it in the least. It turned on him, its glassy, many-faceted eyes glaring with a cold infernal light. Tommy struck out again with his left hand, this time upon the pulpy flesh of the downward opening mouth. An inch higher, and he would have impaled his hand upon the beak with a point like a needle, and evidently used for purposes of attack, since it was not connected with the mandibles. The blow appeared to fall in the only vulnerable place. The monster dropped upon its back and lay there, unable to reverse itself, its antennae and forelegs waving in the air, and the rear legs rasping together in a shrill, strident shriek. Instantly, as Tommy darted out of the way, the swarm fell upon the hapless monster and began devouring it, tearing strips of flesh from the lower shell, which in the space of a half-minute was reduced simply to bone. The most horrible feature of this act of cannibalism was the complete silence with which it was performed, except for the rasping of the dying monster's legs. It was evident that the huge beetles had no vocal apparatus. For the moment left unguarded, Jim Dodd flung down the collar of his fur coat, stared about him, and recognized Tommy. "My God, it's you," he yelled. "Well, can you?" He had no time to finish his sentence. A pair of antennae went around his neck from behind. At the same instant, Tommy, the old man, and the girl were gripped by the monsters, which, forming a solid phalanx about them, began hustling them in the direction of the hole. Resistance was utterly impossible. Tommy felt as if he was being pushed along by a moving wall of stone. Inside the opening it was completely dark. Tommy shouted to Dodd, but the strident sounds of the moving legs drowned his cries. He was being pushed forward into the unknown. Suddenly, the ground seemed to fall away beneath his feet. He struggled, cried out, and felt himself descending through the air. For a full half-minute, he went downward at a speed that constricted his throat, so that he could hardly draw breath. Then, just as he had nerved himself for the imminent crash, the speed of his descent was checked. In another moment, he found that he was slowing to a standstill in mid-air. He was beginning to float backward, upward, but the wall of moving shells pushing against him forced him on, downward, and yet apparently against the force of gravitation. Then of a sudden Tommy was aware of a dim light all about him. His feet touched earth and grass as softly as a thistledown alighting. He found himself seated in the same dim light upon red grass and staring into Jimmy's face.